Okay, so I'm going to get started for this panel. Hello, everyone. My name is Rose Terry, and I'm the marketing manager and a senior innovation specialist at the Innovation Cluster. And I'm so excited to welcome you all on this beautiful sunny day to what may be your 100th or so Zoom meeting. But we guarantee that this is going to be a very excellent and fun Zoom meeting, as well as lots of thoughtful insight that will be shared by our moderator as well as our panelists today. So we know as the Innovation Cluster how important it is to host panel discussions that can create a dialogue, educate, and of course promote discourse, not only to support current entrepreneurs, but also to support aspiring and up-and-coming entrepreneurs as well as startups. So that's why we host these types of virtual events and meetings, to make sure that you are able to learn as much as possible. And we want to make sure that we create an environment for future entrepreneurs so that they can flourish and grow within the startup community. So this subject is very close to our hearts, and we made sure to bring together a panel of some of the most inspirational and wonderful entrepreneurs out there. So we're very excited to introduce them. But before we get there, we are going to welcome, to give some remarks, is Angela Connors from CRRC, which is the Community Race Relations Committee, and she's going to give a couple remarks about the panel today, as well as what the organization does. Angela.
Thank you, Miigwech. So just first want to acknowledge that we are on the Mississauga Anishinaabe territory, and I encourage everybody when they're doing land acknowledgements to really go beyond just having it as a checkoff at the beginning of your meeting, to really thoughtfully reflect on what that means. And that's something that we try to encourage all the folks that we engage with. As mentioned, my name is Angela Connors. I'm the Executive Director for Community Race Relations Committee here in Peterborough. And basically our work is around promoting and protecting human rights and diversity in the city of Peterborough. We have 3 core areas that we focus on, which is our ACE. I like to say that, you know, when people talk about playing the race card, we have to have our ACE, so this is our ACE. So the A is for advocacy and awareness, so we help individuals who may be experiencing racism or discrimination. We also use that as an opportunity to create awareness. We work in collaboration with various organizations, including the Innovation Cluster, around ways to, again, increase that promotion of diversity and inclusion. And also a big part of what we do is around education. So we're available to provide training, consultation, coaching, anything that individuals or organizations feel that they need to create a more positive and welcoming community that we all share. So I'm really excited to hear from our panelists. Of course, I'm a little bit biased because I know some of these folks and have had great conversations with them. And I really love what you said, Rose, at the beginning around, you know, creating dialogue. And I always, I have a favorite quote that I use, which is, true dialogue can only happen if I enter the conversation willing to be changed by it. And this is something that I try to practice, and I encourage everybody else to reflect on that as we go along today's discussion. So thanks for having me. Like I said, looking forward to hearing what all the wonderful panelists have to say today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. Thank you so much. So before I turn it over to our incredible, wonderful moderator today, I am going to let you all in on some short bios about our panelists, just so you know a little bit more about the wonderful people that are sitting on this panel. So I'm going to get right into it, and I'm going to start off with Hussein Darshi. If you could just give a wave. Hussein, awesome. So Hussein, I'm lucky to know Hussein in my life as well. He is the founder of Transit One and the Bus. He is born and raised in Kenya and is a mix of South Asian ethnicity and Asian African culture. His family immigrated to Canada over a decade ago, and his biggest passions are social services and tech. And over 2 years ago, Hussein decided to start Transit One to empower the often forgotten transit riders in small communities with better resources to connect with their home areas. He also works at the One Roof Community Center and often volunteers. Please give Hussein a warm welcome.
Good to see you.
I can't hear everybody giving him a welcome, but yeah, that works too. Next up, we have Juan Broderick. Juan is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Gyroscopic Inc. And Juan, I also have the pleasure of knowing outside of this. Juan's passion for fostering opportunities and community building began in high school, where he became an active part in a series of camps and initiatives centered around removing accessibility borders for students, which is awesome. He continued his passion for people through university by becoming a leader for various initiatives, and received a degree in computer science and gained a wealth of engineering experience at companies like Communitech. And Juan, on top of that, if that wasn't enough, has 8+ years of military experience. Please welcome Juan. Next up, we have Mallory Grant. Mallory is the founder of Tribal Trade Co. and Mallory Grant Business Consulting. Mallory is an Anishinaabe born and raised in her home community of Curve Lake First Nation. She completed her honors Bachelor of Business Administration degree at Wilfrid Laurier University and launched a coalition loyalty program, Res Point Rewards, for her parents' business in Curve Lake, which is great. And not to mention, she also, of course, founded Tribal Trade Co. in 2013, which is 100% female Indigenous owned business aimed to foster inclusion of all Indigenous peoples who wish to proudly represent their heritage. Awesome. And of course, Mallory also has several years of experience in small business and marketing. Please welcome Mallory. And last but not least for our panelists, we have Ropa. Ropa is the founder of Fadzo Productions and Hembo Couture and Trent student. I hope I didn't butcher that Ropa. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. She's passionate about art and leadership education and runs a media channel called Fadzo Media Productions, which produces educational content around entrepreneurship, self-development, and cultural taboos. And I highly recommend you follow her on social. I just recently did, and she's amazing. She also started a clothing boutique called Hambo Couture that specializes in storytelling through its products and services and works with groups like the Community Race Relations Committee in Peterborough, as well as Trent International and more. And if that wasn't enough, she's also working towards obtaining a BBA in Business Administration with specializations in entrepreneurship, marketing, and consumer culture at Trent University. Please welcome Ropa. And last but certainly not least, we have our heavy-hitting, incredible moderator today, Nicole Stephenson. She is amazing, and I am so happy and lucky to get the pleasure to work with her through the Innovation Cluster Board, which she is a member of. So I'm going to read Nicole's amazing bio. Get ready for this one. Nicole Stephenson is the founder of Stevenson Law Group with over 15 years of Canadian capital markets experience. Nicole practices corporate and securities law with a specific focus on corporate finance and capital raising initiatives for public and private companies, compliance and registration matters, and will and estate planning for entrepreneurs and business owners. She also advises senior management, boards of directors, and shareholders on corporate governance, regulatory matters, and business strategy. Prior to founding Stevenson Law Group, Nicole spent over 12 years at the Ontario Securities Commission, a Canadian stock exchange, and in private practice at a corporate and securities law boutique. She sits as the director of boards of private companies and is a director and vice chair of the board of the Innovation Cluster. She is also a member of Toronto Lawyers Association in both Ontario and Canadian Bar Associations. Nicole also holds a Juris Doctor from Queen's University Faculty of Law and a Master of Laws security laws from Osgoode Hall Law School, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from York University. Please welcome Nicole. So I am so excited to hear all of the incredible things that you're all going to talk about today. I can't wait to hear this thoughtful discussion. And I'm going to pass it over to Nicole now to take over the moderation of the panel. Enjoy and have fun, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rose, for your humbling words and your kind words. And I just want to welcome everyone today, our panel members and the staff of the Innovation Cluster and all those in the community who have given their valuable time for the next hour with us. And I want to thank the staff of the Innovation Cluster for starting this conversation on diversity in business and tech. I think it's something that is very timely discussion to have, and I think a lot of people are interested in hearing what these amazing entrepreneurs on this panel have to say about their experiences and their words of wisdom and encouragement for entrepreneurs and future entrepreneurs. So with that said, I thank you all for joining, and what we're going to do today is just go through a series of questions and get answers and insight from our panelists as to what their thoughts are on some of these questions that have been brought to us. And just to start, what I'll do is go around and just ask anyone on the panel if they'd like to add a little bit about themselves. That Rose has given their bios, of course, but if you'd like to add anything and introduce yourself to the members of the broader community, why don't we go ahead and do that right now? So why don't I start with Juan?
I think Rose did a really great job, actually, of summing up everything that is me. I think maybe some other points that I might add is, I guess by trade, I am, I guess, a CTO, but a software engineer and data scientist. And I've worked with a lot of organizations outside of Communitech. So things like TD headquarters, the Department of National Defense, the CSE, so doing counterintelligence there, and a bunch of, I guess, other things as well, kind of in this space that, I guess, led me to here. So hopefully I can bring a wealth of experience from some of those other, I guess, occupations and vocations that I've had over the years, and hopefully shed some light on my experiences. But I think I guess Rose did a great job prior to that. So that's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Juan. Mallory, anything to add?
Sure, yeah. No, Rose did an awesome job of summing up sort of my experience and things like that. But I guess what I could add was that a little bit more information about Tribal Trade Co. is that it all kind of started when I first went to university. A lot of my classmates and professors asked me questions like if my family lived in a teepee and where if the government paid for my education and why I spoke English instead of my native language and things like that. So I realized there was a huge gap of knowledge and understanding of Indigenous people and of the Indigenous culture. So that whole experience and the attempt to fill that gap that I experienced in university is where Tribal Trade Co. started, and which created our whole mission, which is to support you on your journey of feeling connected in learning and celebrating the Indigenous culture. So that's just a little bit of background if you haven't really heard of the business too much.
It's incredible. Ropa?
Hello.
How are you?
I am good. So I think the only thing I would add is that, like it was mentioned, I am from Zimbabwe, and I think that basically just is the part of the reason why I created both of the businesses, is to make sure that I'm helping to empower more women, more young people to know that entrepreneurship isn't this thing that is unattainable, and to know that they do have resources, and people like me who have the privilege of having a family that is entrepreneurial and have their own businesses, I have access to information that I can then send to other people. So we have a podcast and a YouTube channel and a blog that basically look at cultural taboos and try and figure out ways that we can create conversations that can hopefully equip people to make change in different parts of their community. And then Umambo is a clothing company that sources all their products from specific individuals. We get everything custom made, and whenever you receive a garment, you actually get an attachment of the story behind the person who got the garment. So that's a little bit about Umambo and Puzzle Productions. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And I've heard before that someone has said, I've met Hussein on the bus. So Hussein, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I guess my reputation kind of precedes me. The bus is basically one of our primary platforms for the goal of the company. Basically, Transit One is an engagement and data solutions company for transit systems. And basically, our goal is to find ways of connecting people to their communities. And the bus.ca is the first way we're doing it, where we're taking input from riders and basically creating a product that is kind of from them and for them, and just creating an easy way for people to get around their communities. So that's just one of the many pieces that, you know, we're working on and putting together, which is kind of exciting. And I can't say much about them now, but I will in due time. I've worked in the tech industry for about 8 years in anything from digital signage to food tech to being a freelance web developer and web application developer for small businesses and individuals. And as Rose mentioned, I also work at the One Roof Community Center. Great place to volunteer and donate if you're ever considering it. And they basically serve meals and give community space for those that are the most vulnerable in our community. So that's always a soft spot for me. And yep, I guess everything else Rose touched on. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks Hussein. So why don't we just get right to the questions and dig right in. So I'll start with a story that I think will sort of set the tone for this afternoon and start the conversation going. And this is my experience. It's a one-time experience that I thought I would share with everyone. So I once sat at meetings of a prominent board as its acting secretary for the purpose of taking minutes, confirming quorum, and advising of corporate governance matters. The lawyer who held the official role of corporate secretary was not well versed on corporate governance matters, and it's not uncommon for a more senior lawyer to send in a delegate as a subject matter expert. What I learned from my time on this board, excuse me, was that to some members of the board, I was invisible, notwithstanding the fact that I held 2 law degrees from prominent Canadian law schools and had the experience to back up my role. Was I invisible because I was a woman? Perhaps. Was I invisible because I was a Black woman? Maybe. But that's the problem with institutional racism. It's not always something that appears in company policies, but it's in the actions of the people in the organizations themselves and their own biases. On one occasion, I had a member of the same board stop me and said to me that a Black guy, quote and unquote, stopped him to say hello while he was waiting for his plane at an international airport. This board member told me that he did not know who the gentleman was and that this guy said that we sit on the same board. The man looked at me puzzled and said, "Nicole, we don't have a Black guy on our board. Why would he say that?" I responded and said, "Yes, we do." And I told him the board member's name, the name of the Black guy. I left the conversation perplexed. Was he too invisible? Tell us a bit about your experience as an entrepreneur or a person of color in Canada. And have you experienced inequality or racism? And have you experienced it in business? Why don't I get Mallory to start?
I'm muted. I always forget to turn off mute. Putting me on the spot here, Nicole. Yeah, so I've definitely experienced a lot of racism in university as well as in business, but I think it's probably because I don't look extremely Indigenous. I don't walk around in my powwow regalia. So people don't expect me to be an Indigenous person. So what I've experienced more than most people, or what I think, is people will say ignorant remarks not knowing that I am Indigenous, and that puts me in a really tough spot. So I guess a a lot of what I experienced was in university, not too many in like when I was in different jobs and stuff like that, just because I made my, I always introduce myself as Indigenous, as Anishinaabe class, so people would know right off the start not to say anything. But I think that that's sort of another reason that I gravitated towards entrepreneurship, because I was able to kind of create my own rules and my own brand and my own company and my own culture around inclusion and around like a loving attitude and inclusivity and diversity towards everyone. Like that's like the medicine wheel teaching is like the core teaching of the Indigenous culture, and it represents diversity. It represents all the nations of the earth that are equally as close to the creator and or to God or whoever that you pray to. So that's what we're able to create in our own business. So that's kind of one of the reasons that I love being an entrepreneur, and I love being able to like set your own rules and set your own stage and kind of create your own life, because you're not subject to anything else other than what you want to do. So that I'm just going to kind of leave it at that, because I think other people might have a lot more to say. So just to balance it out, I'll just leave my answer there.
I think that's a great point. Entrepreneurialism really allows you to express your true self. And so thank you for sharing that. Hussein, do you have any thoughts about your experience that you care to share as an entrepreneur in Canada?
I think I've seen a few different examples of that. To Mallory's point, occasionally people will say things in a room and not realize what the impact of what they're saying is. One example that comes to me right off the bat is when I started my company, I used to meet with a lot of clients, potential clients, and you'd sit in a room with them, and occasionally, because of the environment, I guess, they would constantly keep pointing out about, we've got a brown person in the kitchen or a black person in the kitchen, or we're equal in our hiring practices, or we don't mind anybody coming through our doors. And sometimes I wonder why it really needs to be said that way versus hey, we're everybody's part, everybody's the same, right? Occasionally I'll get that. The other thing that comes to mind is hiring practices. That's been a really key problem, especially in Peterborough, where many people who do apply for jobs, if their name doesn't sound, for lack of a better example, English, if it's not a Mark or, a Sam or a Steve, occasionally, a lot of the time, either they won't get called back for interviews, or they'll be placed in areas of the business that are not seen as front of house, right? So there's lots of times when I've walked through, the downtown where businesses have a predominantly white or Caucasian person at the front, and we'll have, a person of color in the kitchen or in the warehouse or in the back, with the exception of every time there is an entrepreneur or business owner that is a person of color, then you'll see them in the front. So, it's just changing that perception and trying to make sense of it, but also trying to help people understand that there's a lot more opportunity and potential in, hiring diversity, or just having it part of the practice, not, singling it out as something that they need to do. So that's something that we've tried to do in our business, where we've made a lot of our, marketing material or even content a lot, more generic, that people can use regardless of, whatever race they come from or whatever color their skin is. But also in our hiring practices, where not only are we saying we're equal in the way we hire, but we are also making sure that everybody understands what having diversity in the workplace means, right? Because that's often forgotten.
Thank you, Hussein. Ropa?
I think for me, I always think about it in a very different point of view. I personally can't pinpoint a specific time that someone's been purposefully racist or has shown me some kind of inequality. I grew up in a country that you create opportunities for yourself, because that the government that we have isn't going to create any opportunities for you. So I was taught that when you see a problem, you fix it right there and then. You don't wait for anybody else to fix it. And so when I moved here, I don't think I was very aware of racism. I'm aware of colonization. I'm aware of colorism, but I wasn't very aware of racism and inequality itself, because even when I got to jobs, the thing I always did was I made sure I waved my flag high and proud and everybody knew. And if there was ever any kind of misunderstanding, I made it known right there and then. I believe we all have really big voices, and no matter where in the company you are, you have the ability to speak out and be the change, because sometimes people aren't actually aware that there's a problem until you point it out and say, hey, red flag, hello, there's something happening here, we need to fix this, So I think for me, the way I've always perceived it is that every interaction is a learning opportunity. So sometimes people use certain words and they don't realize what they mean. So use it as a teaching opportunity. What does that word mean to you? Why do you think you should use it? When you then ask people those questions, a lot of them correct themselves before you even have to say anything about it. So I personally haven't experienced any super overt racism or inequality. I was just always taught that you move, and if there's something wrong, you fix it right there and then. Don't wait for anybody else to fix it. So that's my experience.
I love that attitude. So Juan, why don't you tell us about your experiences?
Certainly. I think there's a lot of diverse opinions and really rich kind of, I think, points of view. I'll try to keep just to the actual question itself in my experience. And I think maybe some ideas on culture and kind of practice might bleed into some future questions. But I think kind of like Ropa as well, inadvertent racism and kind of maybe more so systematic racism that I've experienced, I think have been a little bit less. And as an entrepreneur, I think I'm pretty new to the whole world. And prior to that, I was working in technology. So I think I've been extremely lucky in the technology field, though I don't think it's free of inequality. I do believe that I've worked in a lot of different diverse kind of areas. And I think maybe the people that have structured kind of those systems have been really cognizant of making them diverse and ensuring that everybody's culture is represented and everyone feels included. Whereas maybe kind of prior to technology, my entrepreneurship, I have been in experiences with other institutions that I worked for that brought me to pretty remote places. And I think when I kind of get into those situations, kind of like what Ropa said, it's, I think, a little bit more true ignorance in the actual meaning of the word, as is a lack of education and knowledge, as opposed to a kind of claimed ignorance, where I've gone to communities where people haven't actually had a friend that was a person of color before because they had none that went to their school. They maybe finished their education at grade 10 or 11. They never went to university. I think very much growing up between, Jamaica, Ottawa, Toronto, seeing kind of this very diverse kind of group of people and understanding that everyone has this idea of diversity, whereas there is a lot of people that don't get to interact and don't get to kind of get these sort of one-on-one interactions with people. And in a lot of my senses, have a lifelong friend that is a person of color that can kind of let them know that maybe their own little echo chamber with people that they've talked to before that really does seem kind of dogma, that's not true, because now we're in this experience. And like I said, a lot of my friends throughout the military, obviously, and a lot of these things that do take me up north, out east, out west, have been lifelong friends. And it has been a lot of that, I think, leadership, not just from a bottom down level, but a bottom up level, where as a new person in kind of an area where I am the only person of color, it's happened a lot of times, kind of taking it upon myself to be a little bit uncomfortable, to know that you're paving the way for other people. So that kind of network of interactions where that person will know the next person I meet, isn't maybe as scary as I think they are, in regards to not, building those patterns in my brain where I can recognize they look like a friend of mine or whatever it is. And once again, kind of addressing it at the beginning, bringing up things maybe that might be a little bit more problematic, and putting kind of my best smile on and addressing those things for the ease of people in the future. So that's kind of my experience on it.
That's pretty cool. That's a great experience. And it's good that a lot of you in your roles have the confidence and to have the conversation, because I always believe the conversations are important, and it's the only way that we're all going to grow together. So the reason, as you all know, that the Innovation Cluster suggested that this panel come together and we have this conversation, because a lot of it stemmed from the questions that were raised by a lot of people from George Floyd's death, and everyone was aware of it because we were all home for a pandemic. And, you know, as some will say, it was always there, but now we have cameras. And so we wanted to look at everything in business and see what's happening in business. And a lot of people look at it in terms of management and how are organizations addressing diversity in our country. And so around that time on LinkedIn, I saw an interesting quote from a woman by the name of Donna Walren, who's the chief executive at Fairway Group and a very prominent pensions lawyer. And she worked for an international law firm. And she said, quote, "We see and appreciate all the corporate statements of allyship, of standing up against racism and solidarity for inclusion. Please post these statements beside pictures of your C-suite teams, your boards of directors, the upper levels of your org charts, and then put the statements into action. If you're having trouble finding Black candidates, direct message me. I have binders full. Hashtag inclusion, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag enough is enough." So she's doing a play on Mitt Romney's binders full of women as part of his campaign for president back in, I think it was 2012. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts and feelings about the current climate as entrepreneurs and diversity and inclusion and systemic racism. Take it any way you want, but I'd just be interested in your thoughts. So maybe we'll go the other way and start with Juan.
Wonderful. It's definitely a big question. So hopefully I can open up the floor for conversation and not say anything too incendiary. But I think there's a lot going on, and I think maybe just kind of approaching it from one view. And I think mine will definitely be in regards to kind of tech leaders and business leaders in the space. So I think there's a lot to be said, and I hope I don't step on any toes of some, I guess, surrounding points that I don't address. But I think in the tech space and as business leaders, I think there's something really special that we're kind of holding on to, and something really special that we get to actually change. And I think really understanding what technology is in this space, and outside of all the pop words, and really understanding, I guess, like disruptive technology and emergent technology, and the fact that right now, I think there's a big view from a lot of people that aren't in our shoes in regards to kind of a destructive kind of, I guess, lens on things, which I think is super important for a lot of structures that don't kind of serve, I guess, equality amongst all people, but also understanding that the destruction is just as important as the actual construction and building up of things. And because we're in a space that really does challenge so quickly and so intelligently the old systems of kind of everything else that we've come to know, and if it is banking systems, if it is public transportation, if it is everything from knowledge and education, or even just clothing, that we can do things better. And the fact that we can do things better, and we can really focus on basically that we have this opportunity, the world is listening, and we have the power to basically restructure these systems where we can ensure that, because the tools that we're using, we're able to be agile and move quickly, building things properly how they should be. And I think everyone is involved with that decided to come here to kind of learn to do that better, and really taking the onus on ourselves to understand the power that we have in kind of a government system where the business and the technology evolves a lot faster than I believe that technology does, where you can see, all over the world now, where I think the government and kind of big businesses, I guess, at odds sometimes in the understanding of how can we kind of support something that's growing beyond us, and kind of building these structures around something that, is more so reactive as opposed to proactive. So I would say really taking it upon ourselves to educate one another like we're doing today, and as well as understanding the power that we have, the ability we have to kind of restructure our systems, even if there is a little bit of friction at the beginning. What is it like? And I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but what is it like reaching out to more diverse hiring sources? Or what is it going to be like to really understand the value of hiring a diverse group of people, not just because you want to hire, or I guess be seen from the outside looking in as diverse, but really the rich kind of understandings of a company that needs to be agile, needs to be able to pivot, needs to be able to overcome from a whole array of people that have learned how to do that just through interactions of life, or overcoming the adversities that they see from day to day. So I'm just going to kind of look at it in that very clear lens realistically. And it is really, we have such a good foothold in what we can do. Let's be disruptive in the fact that we are going to grow fast. We're going to kind of, outdo a lot of these large companies. And when we do them, ensuring that we're starting at the foundation, like I think everyone else here is, with diversity, inclusion, and really just a moral compass guiding.
That's great. Ropa, do you have any thoughts to add?
I was thinking, I've been reading a lot of books that talk about really the core of diversity and inclusion being understanding equity. And it was saying that if you invite, for example, if a business invites a board member who is a person of color onto their board, but doesn't necessarily equip them with the relevant skills to thrive in that position, have you really like maximized on the diversity portfolio? Not really, because I think the way I see it now is that it's amazing that we can have a diverse group of people on our boards, on our company employment. Like that's amazing. But if we're not equipping people with the skills that they need, I think we're doing them a disservice and doing our company a disservice as well. I'll give an example. I'm a student at Trent University and I am an international student. I grew up in an environment where you're taught that the white people are superior to you and you don't answer to them and you don't quarrel with them. When you then enter a classroom here in Canada and you're taught that they're your equal and you should participate in a classroom environment, that's something that you have to unlearn, because all your life you've been told that you don't answer. But on the averse side, you could be sitting in the same classroom and thinking, this international student doesn't participate. It's not that they aren't aware of the knowledge, it's just that they have to do some unlearning. And so for them to thrive in that environment, they need to be given the skills to unlearn those things. So for me, I think we need to start with some form of equity. If we're saying that we want to have more people of color on our boards, what are the things that are causing people of color not to apply to those jobs? That's the equity piece. So I think we should be focusing on making sure we're equipping people with the resources, with the classes, with the role models and mentors to actually make sure that when they do get those positions, they thrive in those positions and they can create opportunities for other people like them. And then we can gauge diversity and inclusion. So that's my thought on it.
So Rope, on that point, do you think the onus is on the company or is it in the education system? I'd just be interested in your thoughts.
I think it's a little bit of both. When I look at Trent, I'll give an example of Trent because I'm very involved at Trent University. We have events like decolonization events, right? Those are events that are led by the students, but through connections with the university. I think there's a way that we can collaborate, and I think, again, it's learning access to information, and it's understanding that as a person of color, if there is something that you want, it is available, and knowing that your business or the company will support it. So I think schools definitely need to be teaching it, but if they don't teach it, I think when people then come to businesses, and my business, for example, I should be giving people the skills and equipping them with that information so that they don't just work hard for my company, but they work hard to achieve their own personal individual career goals as well. So I think it's a little bit of both. The government needs to do something, the education system needs to be moving something, but also I do think that because people are ending up in businesses and working for people, they definitely need to be equipping people with skills. In the same way that you'll give someone like information about Microsoft Excel when they don't know how to use it, we should be helping people get access to the information that makes sure they thrive in that company as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Mallory, I'd be interested in your thoughts and feelings about the current climate.
Unmute. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to pretend I just because my answer is a little bit different than everyone else's. When I first looked at the question or even heard the question from you on the current climate, on systematic racism, I know that, I don't know if it's just me in my personal bubble, but I'm like kind of living in between two different worlds. So I have like a lot of friends that are like Indigenous advocates, and then I have a lot of like white privilege in my circle. So I guess there's just so many people that are against Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And maybe I just like happen to have those people that I know in my circle. And I think that because there's so much pushback from so many people on like inclusion, and they just like want us to kind of shut up already, it's really important for us to be resilient and to continue pushing and to continue making this an important issue, because there's so many people that are in positions of power, in positions of education, that are going to decide what youth are being taught in schools, and what companies are like. When Nicole, when you asked Ropa this question, I was like 100% on the education side, because I think it starts like when you're little, what you're taught in schools. Because I know that from like an Indigenous person, when they're teaching in schools still that like the truth of Canada is like something else, like kids that are growing up in school they don't know the truth to this day, and we're living in freaking 2020, right? So there's a huge problem there. So I think that when youth and children are like getting taught in school, they need to understand the truth and understand equality, because those values are setting like the groundwork, like the culture, the personalities of Canadian youth. So I think that like starting there is like going to make a huge difference. And in terms of like how it's affected our business, I know that like we're just coming around the corner of like Canada Day and stuff, and like in the past we've kind of been like, oh, like to our Canadian friends, happy Canada Day. But this year we took a totally different stance on it, and like we posted something that was like, if you are like, how do you celebrate Canada as an Indigenous person without, or how do you celebrate it if you're Indigenous, because it's totally against like your people, and you're celebrating like your own colonization of your own people, right? And if you're non-Indigenous, if you're Canadian, like how do you celebrate it without insulting your Indigenous friends? So a lot of people, like I got so many messages just from that question, because people were like, what do you mean? Like they just like didn't even think about like what Canada Day meant to Indigenous people, right? Like it's like we're celebrating cultural genocide, but people don't think about it because it's not fun. It's fun to just like have a barbecue and have balloons and fireworks, right? Like even my husband, like my own husband asked me like, why don't you just like celebrate and have fun because it feels better? It's like, well, yeah, it does feel better, but I don't know, like challenge yourself sometimes to ask like why you celebrate things and what things mean and what that actually means about the country's history. So yeah, I'm like super passionate about this topic, but I'll cut it off there.
No, I think that's great. And I think you brought up two really good points. The first point being education is where it starts. And I tend to agree with you. I think there's a lot of, not just in the education system, but there's a lot of resources out there like junior achievement, like the innovation clusters and other clusters around Canada that are similar to the innovation cluster that offer resources and opportunities for people to learn. And so I think education is very key. And I think the second thing that you said that it's really important, and I just want to touch on a bit, is having your experience as an Indigenous person and then having friends who are Canadian and not understanding what Canada Day means to you and what Canada Day means to them, and how we can all live in the same country and still have a different view of this one day. And I think when you have the conversation which you have with your friends, I think it's important because people get frustrated when they don't know. So a lot of you started, you have some of your friends who are just tired of the Black Lives Matter. And I think that's happening because people didn't understand what it meant. And I feel that some people think it's to the exclusion of all others. And it's not that one life matters and the other life doesn't matter. It's that the Black Lives Matter movement started with the Trayvon Martin killing back in the US. And this was a young teen who was wearing a hoodie in his father's gated community and was killed by the security guard who got off on charges because he looked like he didn't belong. and he happened to be stronger than the security guard, and he hit him. And so that evidence got the security guard off. And so it's evolved as a movement stemming from that. But a lot of people don't know that, because you've had politicians, particularly the current administration in the US, sort of bastardize the true meaning of that movement. And so it's not because other lives don't matter. It's people are saying in the US, here's a group of people that are having a situation happen to them. There's police brutality, there's discrimination in this particular group of people, and their communities standing up and saying their lives matter too. And so I think it's important that we're having this conversation so people can understand it's not that if your house is on fire, your neighbor's house doesn't matter, but the fireman needs to focus on your house to take out that fire. So at that time, your house matters, but it doesn't mean your neighbor's house doesn't matter. And so that's really how I'd summarize the movement in a nutshell, but it's good to have that conversation. Hussein, I'd definitely be interested in your thoughts on the current climate and your feelings about what's going on.
So I'm actually very glad that these conversations are happening. Unfortunately, over circumstances that could easily be avoided, but it's bringing a lot of opportunity to have different kinds of conversations. I think every time I've seen this movement surge up again, the quality of conversations that are happening, not just for Black lives, not just for Indigenous folks, not just for people of color, for everybody altogether, is really changing each time. The only thing I worry about is it becoming like a cultural phenomenon more than, like many of you have talked about the real meaning of what it really means, right? And I think we've seen that with other movements like, queer rights movements, where it's all of a sudden become this business opportunity where certain times of the year, we're celebrating people, but at the other times of the year, we're letting things go. So that's definitely something that I'm curious to see where that goes, but I'm glad that we're having more of these conversations, and I hope they continue, just outside of, these particular time ranges where, they become a big thing.
No, that's a great point, and I think it's a great segue to you bring up, queer lives and other types of diversity. There was an author, Vera Myers, who has a quote that says, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so this is all about race and inclusion. And so I ask all of you, are there any times that you feel like you were invited to the party, but you weren't asked to dance? So Mallory, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right. So I haven't really thought about that too much, like as an entrepreneur, because I thoroughly feel like when you enter into the world of entrepreneurship, there's so much like freedom and power within that you kind of like, you host your own party. Like you're that's just how I think about it. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but you kind of just like live your own life and you run your own ship, and you have your own party and you have your own dance, and it doesn't matter what other people do and if they invite you, because this is like, it's all in your control, and however hard you want to work and how awesome you want to be, that's totally up to you. So that's why it's also so like attractive to enter into entrepreneurship and to start your own business and everything. And yeah, that's kind of my take on that question.
It's awesome. Ropa?
A little bit controversial maybe, but I think the diversity is being invited to the party is definitely something that I can relate to, because I think with being a babypreneur, I don't have a lot of places that I can actually like go on my own. I don't know a lot of places. So a lot of it is meeting people, and they're like, oh, we have this event, you should totally come to it, and getting like opportunities to network with people at those events. But the part of inclusion is being asked to dance. I definitely have started seeing it more. I think because I, again, was always taught that when you're then invited to the dance, you take up the opportunity to go dance out there on the dance floor. So I think as I've started interacting with more entrepreneurs that are people of color, I'm beginning to realize that there's almost like a dichotomy where you have people who were waiting to be asked to dance, but also people who are afraid of asking people to dance. And then so no one does anything and we're kind of just at a standstill. So I would encourage more people, if you can, just have the confidence, if, when, and if you have been invited to the table, really speak out and make sure that your voice is being heard. And if it isn't any table to be invited to, create your own table. We have so much power. There's so much power in our voices. There's so much power in our intellect. And I think if there isn't even an opportunity to be invited into the dance, create your own dance. People will be attracted to that and they'll come. And that's an opportunity for you to network and grow the dialogue. So I think people are always scared of what the other person is gonna react to. And so because of that, we don't do anything. I'm afraid of asking and you're afraid of asking. And then it's just like, no one does anything. So I would encourage everybody to just have the guts to be uncomfortable. There's power in being uncomfortable. So just dive in there. The worst thing that can happen is rejection, but you've done your thing. And at the end of the day, you can go knowing that you did everything that you could to be part of whatever it is that you were doing. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. Dane, what are your thoughts?
To Ropa's point, like, you know, I agree that, like, I've seen in entrepreneurs that resilience is that big thing where, you know, you're able to take those steps and not be as scared as, you know, somebody else. But a lot of the times those opportunities aren't available for a lot of people. Like, I've been to networking events where there are certain people sitting on the side of the room, right? And purposely they kind of get shifted into those sides of the rooms by everybody else that's sitting in there and that's confident that can do all this. So it's not just, you know, the organizers or, you know, the individual themselves, but like there's a lot that the bystanders can do as well. I think another point to that is also with the dance and being invited versus being asked to dance is kind of the question of equality versus equity, right? Equality being, yes, we invited you to the dance, that's great. But equity is creating the opportunity, like treating people differently based on the need they have, right? So, you know, somebody might go to the dance, but because they can't dance a certain movement, do we not invite them at all, right? The other, on the flip side, I've seen events where, or conversations where I'm purposely being invited because I'm a person of color, right? But I don't get invited to a lot of other things where I'll hear about them later and I'm like, oh, that would have been nice to go to, right? Because I have something to add to that conversation. But then again, like Ropa said, it's both sides kind of trying to find that balance and, you know, working together to kind of put that together. So yeah.
Well, that's great. Juan, what are your thoughts? What are your experiences?
Certainly. I won't take too long because I know we're pretty, I think, looking not too much time left. But I'll go ahead and maybe approach it from a different angle because I think we've kind of talked a lot about kind of the entrepreneurship experience. And at Gyroscopic, we're quite a fast-growing team. And I think obviously working for other large kind of technology organizations in the military, I've been able to kind of see it from obviously both ends. So being in, you know, upper middle management or being a very low-level worker, that and as well as an entrepreneur. I think with entrepreneurs, we very much have, or we kind of have to assume a complex in a little bit of a way. There's a lot of books out there in regards to kind of the startup spirit and how cultures are supposed to be formed. And I think having a very rigid idea and everything's going to be inclusive and, you know, maybe the culture more so is what we enforce in regards to, you know, benefits and foosball tables and, you know, 4-day work weeks and whatever it may be. But I think really understanding from a perspective as a business owner that has a business with a lot of employees that the dance and kind of the, I guess, the actual party itself should be viewed kind of from that employee level where realistically, the culture is not something that we can gatekeep and the culture is not something that we can have these rigid boundaries are. The culture is something that employees create, and it's something that naturally happens on the actual makeup of your team. So if I realize that I'm hiring a lot of people that maybe have some sort of cultural bearing on it, sort of thing, then obviously talking to those people and understanding that even if I believe that, it should be this way and that way, understanding that that might not be exactly how, this demographic, if it's socioeconomic or if it is kind of, the color of their skin or whatever it may be, operates, as comfortably, and really kind of being more so the overwatch sort of thing, and really opening up that conversation, understanding what you can do to support them, and understanding that your kind of, I guess, greatest power more so is not the fact that you can kind of imagine this idealized state and try to put everyone into that box that is the most inclusive system, but more so understand what inclusive means to those individual people, and then work around that to understand how you can make those small sub-segmented inclusivenesses kind of mesh a little bit better, and then how basically the arts, the customs, the cultures will really create the overall culture of your business, as opposed to the beanbag chairs and the go-karts in the office or whatever it may be. Very tech focused, but I think that's maybe another way of looking at the dance and the party itself. So invite them, get the the marks and understand their values, but also make sure that you create the culture around how they feel comfortable, and then teaching one another through kind of these experiences of the employees, how the different cultures work. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So I have to say, I really appreciate hearing all your views on that question. As an entrepreneur myself, and even when I was an employee before I was an entrepreneur, I would always say I invited myself to the parties and I invited myself to dance. I think at some point it's got to be upon the individual, and maybe that's why I'm an entrepreneur, to take themselves off the sidelines and figure out how it is to get into that dance, because nothing like shaking your good little booty is going to get your creativity moving as an entrepreneur. So my words of encouragement is to invite yourself to the party and ask your own self to dance, and then you'll see how many new dance partners that you find. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of sum up the last three questions into one, and ask all of you what you, if you could tell everyone what your support systems are, what spaces or resources that you rely on, and what you would like to see happen to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in business and corporations, and how entrepreneurs should be part of that change. So it's a pretty loaded question. It's 2 in 1, but in the interest of time, I'd be very happy to hear all of your thoughts on that. So maybe we'll start with Ropa.
Oh, okay. I think for me, a really big resource that I use is the CRRC. I do have a bias because I'm a board member, but I'm very big on starting the conversation. I think a lot of us get stuck in just learning to start the conversation. And I think CRRC does offer trainings that help with conversation starting and just making sure that everybody is equipped with the right language to maneuver those conversations, so that you're not leaving wounded from the conversation. You leave being heard and feeling like you've achieved something, even if you don't necessarily agree on the opinions that were shared. I think for me as well, a big resource has been my business society at Trent University. I'm only just starting my business. It's only been alive. My baby's been alive for 2 years, both of them. And I'm only just getting to know some of the resources that are available in the community. In terms of what I would wish for there to be in the community, I really wish there was, it might already exist, but I think the one thing I've struggled with is finding information that's tailored to immigrants who are trying to invest in entrepreneurship here in Canada. I think whenever I ask questions and try to create like connections, everybody has an assumption that you already know all the laws and you already were taught in school like how to go through taxes and how to file your taxes and how to file business taxes. And we actually don't know those things. And I think it would be really, really amazing if there were resources that were tailored to international people. I think maybe the New Canadian Center might have them, but specifically for students who might be looking to invest in Canada as well. I think that would be amazing.
Oh, that's
I don't
great.
know if I answered everything. I try to just
That's
summarize
great.
it.
No, absolutely. Mallory?
Neat. Okay. Okay, so I guess like for my support systems for dealing with different things, it kind of involves the second question that you asked about what I'd like to see happen. You might see why in a sec, but um, so for me, the whole like my I guess social media audience, whenever I'm like going through something, I really like to like open up to my social media audience and try to get support from them, because like my journey, I've been pretty open through like Instagram and Facebook. I do like really frequent Facebook lives and stuff like that, usually a few a week, just to share like the journey of going through like my Indigenous sort of reconnection, and you know, all those different things that people experience in their life. And I find that that's like my biggest support system, because these people that become loyal followers, they are connecting to you. So um, that's like a huge support for myself. And also, if like there's people that are in certain positions in businesses and in corporations that um, are decision makers on diversity and equity and inclusion, they might at some point come across your story and come across your page or whatever it is that you're sharing. So the more that you open up to these conversations and share your journey and your experiences, like I'm kind of biased because like my background's digital marketing, but the more that you share your journey and talk about these things, your audience and your tribe is going to expand, and these people on a personal level who are in these positions are going to be more likely to come across your content and come across what that you have to say and be impacted on a personal level. And then that's when they make those changes in their roles, instead of like contacting them like in between 9 to 5 and saying, hey, you need to make these changes in your company. No, like just start sharing more. Like that's what I have as a goal for myself, and what I have as a goal for my fellow entrepreneurs that are a minority, to just share their experiences and try to build their allies, build your tribe, build your audience, so that people can start to understand and start to connect with you, and really learn and educate themselves because they like you and because they form those connections. So I think that kind of encompasses what we were getting at there.
That's awesome. And Juan, what are your thoughts?
Awesome. I might have jumped to Sonda, but I guess I'll go and then I'll give you some time. I'll kind of sum that up pretty quickly. But I think I have quite a few thoughts. And once again, it might kind of allude back to the point at the beginning that I made in regards to kind of constructive and sort of destructive views. But I really do believe, firstly, that one of the most important things I think for my, I guess, progression to the career that I'm currently at was the mentorship that I've received over my life. So mentors, men, women, I guess all races and colors and whatnot, and the importance of that. And then also basically the understanding of when it's important to become a mentor. I think as people that are very critical of themselves, as business leaders, and I guess people that really strive for greatness, they, I think, have a very difficult time understanding when is the right time to become that mentor. And I really don't believe that there is any good time, and you really shouldn't wait for those things. So the idea that kind of someone else at a very high kind of regard, or maybe someone else with a little bit more life experience, or someone that specifically went to that field, if it is kind of counseling or whatever it may be, is the best mentor, I think might be something that we have to unlearn. The fact that everyone, I think, has a little bit of an onus to kind of whatever, you know, demographic that they might prescribe to, if it is some marginalized community, to reach back out and talk about your experiences, just like everyone already said so well. And also the fact that building some of these systems, I know with the university, obviously I went to Trent University, but I was able to use a lot of the tools there, if it was levy funds and whatnot, to create an annual event, basically Electricity Hacks, that invites people of all different demographics and really alleviates the boundaries there financially and in a bunch of other regards to bring people there. And basically starting these small things with simple structures that really can become something so large. And I think historically some great huge societies and initiatives started with a couple people meeting under a tree at a library, and to this day, you know, they're very large organizations, and maybe some more heinous than others, but the fact that you can do a lot of good work basically, but just putting your best foot forward, trying to put something together, and then when you kind of gather that group, if it is through digital marketing or whatever it is, you can kind of start to see some of the things that you can pull and piece together to help that grow. And then also, once again, if that foundation is you know, built on a moral compass and built on doing things right, then ensuring that, you know, that is now a totem that people can look towards basically to ensure that if they ever need a role model that is a person of color or a person in this marginalized community, not only can I go there, I can learn about their chapter, but also I can speak to those people. And you know, starting light, you know, not investing too much, and then you really realize, I think a community will grow around you that has those interests, and before you know it, you know, it can do a whole lot of good. So I think that's my point to that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Hussein? So what support systems and spaces do you rely on?
Sure.
And what would you like to see happen to improve diversity, equality, inclusion for businesses and corporations? And how should entrepreneurs be a part of that?
Definitely, there's a lot of organizations within the Peterborough community, and I think a lot of them are echoed in like other communities as well. Some of them have been mentioned, the CRRC, there's the New Canadian Centre, which is always full of so much information, so many resources, and the entrepreneurship programs that have been coming out of there to support local female newcomers has been incredible, because the work they come up with is just beyond. There's also another piece that is worth tapping into is the international students associations at a lot of different schools. I think a lot of the time, as a resource for hiring or training or building good staff and culture, that often gets you know, kind of looked over as, you know, it's just a small association. You know, there's culture in there. There's a lot of a wealth of information really that can be tapped into. The other one is incubators or accelerators. I think it's really important to create that culture in there. One thing I really admire about the innovation cluster is that I've never ever felt like that I have to, you know, fit in culturally at the same time as trying to run my business. It's always been just about running my business, and I think that that's been a key factor for me. Part of it was also, you know, when I first took a tour of the place, I could see people of other cultures within that space, you know, running a business, growing a business, you know, working as employees at some of these businesses. And I think that was a huge inspiration for me. So these are definitely things that you can tap into in other cities as well. In terms of what needs to be done, I think creating conversations for diversity is one of them. I mean, there's never a good time to do that, right? And it doesn't matter who it is. Just come to the table and try and figure it out. I think there's a lot about assumption of how it should look versus actually asking people and trying to build it. All too often I've seen groups or organizations rush to try and create a policy just for the sake of creating a policy versus waiting a little longer and tapping into resources to build a stronger or better policy. That's definitely something that, you know, people like businesses or organizations can think of. And, you know, diversity training really on the lower level. If you look at associations like Chamber of Commerce's incubators, a lot of the training that they do, a lot of the time, there's no conversations of diversity or no training of diversity. And that's something that could definitely be improved on. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And, you know, as a lawyer and an entrepreneur, I look to other lawyers and other entrepreneurs, and not other entrepreneurs who just offer third-party service providers, but just, you know, tech entrepreneurs, food services entrepreneurs, just entrepreneurs generally. I look to as networks and mentors, and similar to what all of you have said, it's who you associate yourself with and who you want to be like is what I look at. So if I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to get to know the entrepreneurs, the successful entrepreneurs. I want to know how they did it. I want to know their mistakes. I want to know what I can learn from them, and the same thing with my profession. So I found that people who are doing things that I want to do have been a great network for me. And it's regardless of their culture, their ethnicity, their race. I look specifically to what are you doing, and I want to do that too. Show me how you did it. Tell me the mistakes you made, and help me make the wheel run more efficiently. So that's been my center of safety and my network. And I have to say, just coming from Toronto and being introduced to Peterborough through the Innovation Cluster, what a resource this town has. It's absolutely amazing. And of course, I've been a little bit biased, but I came in ignorant and I was sold right away. There's nowhere in Ontario that I've seen yet that offers what the Innovation Cluster offers for place of resource and for entrepreneurs to grow and flourish. And I think Hussein, you said it best when you said you walked in. It wasn't about what culture you were, what color you were, or who you were, what gender you were. It was about your business and how your business can flourish. And so I encourage, others to look to the Innovation Cluster as a great network and a safe space, if you will. So we're coming to the end, and I just thought if you guys in 1 minute can just summarize any final thoughts or words of wisdom and encouragement that you can share with those listening today. So why don't we start with Hussein?
Okay.
Sorry, Ropa, go ahead.
Oh, go. Okay. I wrote a blog yesterday, and basically the premise of the blog is if your actions don't match up to your words, then you have nothing to say. And basically, it's really harsh to say this, but I think it's amazing that we're starting these conversations about diversity and equity. But I think it's important that we actually put our words into action. Let's create goals that have deadlines that are timely and smart goals, basically. Let's create very specific goals, measurable, all of the smarts, you can Google it, and put our money where our mouths English, where our mouths are. I think it's important that we start the conversations, but we don't just stop at conversations. The second thing and the last thing is be okay with being uncomfortable. If you're having a conversation and you start feeling discomfort, don't run. A lot of the times that discomfort is where you figure out the problem and you can actually come up with a proper solution. So when it starts being uncomfortable, really sit in that discomfort and analyze why you're feeling uncomfortable and use that as a tool to actually propel real change. Yeah. Okay.
Hussein, thank you, Ropa. Hussein?
I think Ropa said it best earlier, where she said, if you're not invited to dance, create your own dance. I think as entrepreneurs or even people in the tech sector, like that's something that I guess for the most part comes very natural to us. So definitely consider that. And on the other side, if you have an organization where you need these changes, there's lots of people in the community who are willing to have those difficult conversations with you. Yes, they are new to you. Yes, you've never had those conversations. You don't know what questions to ask. There's so many people in the community who can provide that information for you. I mean, and just off the bat, I'm thinking of everyone who's on this panel right now. Most of the conversations that we've had today are really open and honest. And I think many of them would be willing to have that with you. On the flip side, I am by no means an expert in how to do this with a lot of other communities aside from, maybe my own. But I'm always happy to hear about how, people interact with communities, how we can make it better. Even as an entrepreneur, being that I have a company called Transit One, it's catering to a lot of people who are often ignored. There's a lot of things I'm probably missing, and I'm always happy to have that conversation with anyone who wants to have that conversation to add that value. But on the flip side as well, being able to add value to your businesses or your conversations if you need me to. You're welcome to reach me on Twitter, which is I think my first and last name, or even by email, which is my first name @thebus.ca. Pretty much plain and simple. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Juan?
Certainly. I think once again, my view will kind of be maybe from the entrepreneur to a business that is a little bit more employee heavy sort of thing. So I think one thing that is super important, aside from starting that conversation, is making sure that you're listening. And I think as a a founder that is, kind of running a business that is very employee heavy, understanding the value of the human beings that are kind of running that engine, and also the dignity and the importance of them, and the power that you have basically to influence that person and change that person's life. So I think everyone kind of having that humanist view and understanding not only do you have to make a product, but also the fact that these people are kind of here for you, and realistically as a manager, you should be 100% there for them. So I think humbling yourself, trying to put your ego aside, truly listening to them, and then also trying to move things around outside of kind of the books you might have read in regards to business practices and how things used to be done, and understanding that this is a new problem that we have to solve. And if we really do want to disrupt and we want to do things differently and properly, then it might take a little bit of ingenuity and might take a little bit of going against what you might think is the best, but understanding that even if you maybe are, a marginalized community, you don't know what's best for everyone, listening to them and trying to tackle these new problems, I think is going to be really exciting, and we can make a huge impact. So humble yourself, listen, and let's all try our best, I guess.
Wonderful. Thank you.